Welcome to episode 38 of the First Person Podcast with me, Giuseppe Femia, the FPS Podcast Producer, Sabrina Sgandurra, our Editor-in-Chief / Book Reviews Editor, Lia Black, our Co-Managing Editor / Commentaries Editor, and Patrick Dolan, our other Co-Managing Editor / Essays Editor. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the companions that venture forward with us into the night, or the ones that stand by us through the good and the bad. We will be examining and discussing the plot significance that the in-game companions have and what they undergo while keeping us company. But first, let's talk about who we are and what we've been playing recently.
So again, I'm Sabrina, and lately I have been playing a stupid amount of Civ 6 and also a lot of Halo 3 and Halo Reach from the Master Chief Collection on PC, and it's been a lot of fun.
So, for those of you who don't know, I am Lia, and pretty much as always, for as long as you're going to be listening to this podcast, I'm playing far too much Overwatch because that's just what I do. I also came across a game called Tell Me Why, which I found through Game Pass, and I'm sure we'll find time to talk about at some later time, but not today.
Tell Me Why looks awesome, by the way. Hey, and I'm Patrick. I am the Essays guy, and this is my voice. What I've been playing, just on Saturday, I've been wanting to pick up Death Stranding for a long time, and I bit the bullet. It was on sale for $50 Canadian, and I've never liked really a Kojima game before, which might be blasphemy, but I'm loving this game so much. Like, every overindulgence, every weirdness is just really hitting me in a really nice place, which doesn't sound right, but whatever.
I think it sounds perfectly fine to me.
Excellent.
And as I said, my name is Giuseppe Femia, and I've been playing Mario Odyssey. So I've just been in that beach level, flying around as a squid and getting all the moons there because that's my favorite part of the game.
It might be the best Mario, 3D Mario. I'm gonna say it.
I don't know. I really liked Galaxy, but Odyssey is fun too.
I find Wii controls very hard for me.
Wait, who's Mario? What?
That's it. You're out.
All right, so getting into it, we're here to talk about our favorite companions today. So, everyone has their own game that they're going to be discussing, but let's just get started with a question. What purpose does a companion serve that we cannot have the main character enact on their own? What do they bring to the table that normal first-person shooters can't give you through their depictions?
So my focus on this is always going to go to Legend of Zelda, because that series is my favorite game series of all time. And I think that so the context is like it's an action adventure game for those that don't know, and the original games are basically like you follow a similar plot of Ganon has stolen the sacred power of the Triforce and or captured Princess Zelda. Link is a chosen hero in most of the games, at least, and some of the details in some of the games sort of put him as either like a predetermined chosen one or just somebody that's a little more ordinary. But he has to go rescue Zelda and the Triforce and save the land of Hyrule. So for most of the games up until Breath of the Wild, there is that companion, and it's a huge part of the series. At least beginning with Ocarina of Time and onward. The first two games, not so much. It sort of functioned, it started as like a little more of a tutorial aid, with Navi, the first fairy companion, sort of helping you, kind of like a Microsoft Clippy but in this case with certain narrative elements being like, hey, listen, go this way. And a lot of players find that annoying. It's a bit of a meme now. But when you get later renditions of the game, like you get Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword, the companions become so much more part of the story. So if I'm thinking of Twilight Princess, Midna, she is this like spunky, sassy, I'm going to do what I want and you're just here to help me along my journey. But she sort of has a whole character arc on her own, and she's actually the story revolves a little more around her than it does around Link, and at least for a large majority of the game. And I think what that does is it lets me sort of have this like pseudo social interaction while being immersed in a world and taking on the role of a character that isn't me, but still getting access to that character's sort of lifestyle and everything.
What would you say is the companion in Skyward Sword?
It's Fee, I think.
Is that the bird?
No.
Would we consider the bird a companion?
Actually, yeah, that's a fair assessment. But no, I would have thought it would have been Fee because she's the other sort of, what's it called? Like fairy that's with you.
I didn't play that game extensively, the Skyward Sword, but I did really love flying around on the bird. That was probably my favorite part of the game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So then, going back to the main question, Sabrina, if you were to like point out something that the players are able to experience as part of the companion that Link has that can't be experienced otherwise through Link by himself, what would you say that would be?
Well, again, it's dependent on which game in the series, but if I'm looking at Twilight Princess, what I think is, so Midna comes from the sort of like Twilight realm or the Shadow realm. It would be like an equivalent, and Link gets access to it through her. Otherwise, Link would have. I mean, he does get turned into a wolf, so he does have access to it before he meets Midna, but he would have never been able to cross that boundary between, the regular light world or whatever of Hyrule and the Twilight realm without Midna being there to sort of explain A, what's going on, and B, how everything works. So the player gets access to two different worlds at the same time through Link that otherwise wouldn't have been the case.
Okay, so she kind of performs the role of like introducing the fish out of water to the completely different world while simultaneously fulfilling that kind of narrative jump that the player requires.
Yeah, exactly. She's like that. She's just I think of her almost like a door to another area, I guess, but more like a door to another way of seeing things and interacting with the world in a way that isn't immediately obvious and accessible to the player.
Speaking of doors to other areas, Patrick, you were going to talk about BioShock Infinite.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of the role of your companion in that, Elizabeth, and how Sabrina was talking about Midna. So just for those who don't know, BioShock Infinite is the third in the BioShock games, which I've recently played a second time in preparation for this podcast, and I just finished playing the first two. So I've been on a bit of a BioShock odyssey. But so, I mean, a lot of people think of BioShock, they think of the underground world of Rapture, which is not underground, underwater. And in BioShock Infinite, you're in the sky. You're in this city called Columbia that's ruled by Zachary Comstock, who's this religious zealot / nationalist who's kind of ruling over the city. Where the companion comes into play is like the other BioShocks, you're this kind of single note male character. You're Booker DeWitt, and he has to, very ambiguously bring someone the girl to pay a debt. Bring us the girl, pay the debt is something you hear a lot. And that girl in question is Elizabeth, who's the daughter of Comstock, Zachary Comstock, locked in a tower. You essentially, I guess she's held captive, but you kind of kidnap her / bring her along, and she becomes sort of like your like the kind of Alice in Wonderland thing, your introduction into the world, your guide, and yeah, she really kind of she moves the story along in a way, and maybe we'll get to the like her role is essentially. She's been criticized for this by, among people, former essays writer Sarah Stang for being like a for being kind of in narrative, a strong character, but in gameplay being just like someone who's helping Booker DeWitt, your main character. She's like a battle aide. You kind of command her to do different things. And these different things have to do with her powers. She's able to open up what are called tears, which are essentially like portals into other dimensions. And she will open up these tears in like I guess the game is kind of a walking simulator where you kind of go through this environment, Columbia, and then you encounter different like set pieces / arenas where you just kind of shoot a bunch of people. And so you'd command her to open up a tear to get you more weapons or set up a turret type thing. And in the meantime, she is kind of like, I don't know, like hiding and scrounging around for magic power, which is called Vigor in this, that gives you powers that are plasmids in BioShock, the original ones, but they, you can do your typical magic moves, or she'll find you ammo, or she'll find you money to buy, more ammo and that sort of thing. So her role is maybe kind of like a buffed up Binda. Like, I really liked how she is she really fills in a lot of the lore of the place for you, and I get lost in video games so much, so kind of having her plus the little button it tells you the right way to kind of direct me in the right place, even though that game is on rails, I would still get lost. I really find that really helpful of her. But then unlike Midna, you kind of like utilize her in your fight, against these, so-called baddies.
I personally loved the BioShock series. But I'm wondering, did you ever get to play the DLC for BioShock Infinite where you're back in Rapture?
Yeah, I loved it. Like the episode 2, a lot of I'll say this because we're not talking about it, but I feel like it has to be mentioned. BioShock Infinite really does a clumsy, and that's putting it nicely, clumsy job with racism. Like, they confront racism in this 1912 world, but really use it as set dressing, and then ultimately make like the this revolutionary leader into like a bad guy to kind of say like well, there's bad people on both sides. But then episode 2 kind of tries to smooth that out, saying that Daisy Fitzroy, the revolutionary leader, was like kind of doing it for the greater good. So like Elizabeth could, fulfill this destiny, which is again weird. But yeah, the DLC, I really liked being Elizabeth, and like it kind of gave her a bit more agency than what she didn't have in BioShock Infinite. But like at the end of it, I kind of felt like that episode 2 was maybe a bit better than the entire game.
Yeah, well, because I was gonna ask. So I didn't get to play all of it. I played, I think it was the first little bit of the I want to say it was like Burial at Sea or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
And where you're still playing as Booker and this, or maybe you're not Booker. I can't remember.
Yeah, you're Booker.
You would be. Yeah, okay. But when Elizabeth comes to meet you, and it's like that whole 1950s style, I'm wondering if there's a difference between how she is in the DLC versus, or at least how she's portrayed and what she does during the DLC versus what she does in the main game.
I mean, apart from, I feel like it's pretty similar, like, because there's 2 episodes for Burial at Sea, and the first episode is pretty much she's like your companion, but then in episode 2 you play as Elizabeth, and she has different powers. Like, it's a lot more stealth based. You're not supposed to kind of like, as like how Booker would, you run in and use your powers. For Elizabeth, and I mean, this could be kind of weird gameplay versions of gender difference that Ken Levine is deciding on, but it does make for an interesting way to play the game. But yeah, then I don't think you do really have a companion beyond sort of you have Booker DeWitt, who's just like a I don't want to actually give it away. But you have like a radio companion, like the earlier Bioshocks.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of distinction to make, and it'll kind of tie into when I get talking about Nier Automata, which I didn't clear with anybody because it's me, and why would I bother to tell anybody what I'm doing? But the difference between an active companion, someone like Elizabeth, as much as you are giving her those orders, but she is actively there to help you, versus that radio companion, which I guess kind of telepathy-wise is what Navi plays the same role in Zelda, where it's not somebody who's actively helping you complete tasks so much as instructing you from a distance. It's not one-to-one, but they play very similar but distinct roles as companions.
Yeah, I feel like at least with Legend of Zelda, the most active, I guess, the companions get are, at least in the ones I'm thinking of, are either just locking on. So like Midna, when you use the lock on feature with Midna, it actually makes it look like she's actually helping you in the fight a little more than what they have for the animation for Navi, which is just floating around the animal. But then you get the companion in Wind Waker, who's the literal boat, and I can never remember his name, but that's a little more active in terms of, but not during combat. So it's a different type of active thing, because he just sort of helps you sail around and things like that. So he's doing an action for you, but you're still like, it's not quite the same as, say, Elizabeth, who's there like literally finding you ammo and salts and whatever else.
Yeah, gameplay wise, she's great. Like, I wish there's many games where I wish there was someone just tossing me supplies and like helping me out, killing a bunch of people that I need to kill in games.
Speaking of Nier Automata, which I didn't pronounce right, Lia, why don't you tell us about Nier Automata?
So, for the sake of companions with this, I am largely going to be looking at the first ending of 26, because there's 26 endings in the game. The way that you play as 2B, and you have your companion 9S, but I'm also going to be kind of comparing in that way the differences of 9S as an active companion versus Pod 042 or 153. For the life of me today, I can't remember whose is 2B's and who is 9S's. They serve the same purpose. So, for those of you that don't know, Nier Automata is a relatively open world adventure RPG. You take on the role of an android 2B to fight the machines who have taken over Earth in an effort to save humanity, which, without spoiling too much, comes to a unsurprisingly catastrophic conclusion. As far as companions are considered, 9S originally is this sort of young-seeming, quick to the gun, or rather a sword, because who's going to do anything but run around in swords in a post-apocalyptic world of robots? Where 9S is that one who always wants to be in the fray and going and doing, and as 2B, you don't necessarily want him there. You kind of are this lone fighter until eventually you start kind of coming to interact with him, and as much as you aren't people, you are androids. It really goes to show the humanity that can form even beyond two humans through the interactions between 2B and 9S. Where as much as it's for exposition, where in the opening scenes of the game, you see the two of them obliterate themselves in order to save things before being reconstructed because androids. But the ways that not just an exposition or active fighting, like Elizabeth doesn't always partake in, but helps you through, there is a lot more emotional weight that comes from companion interactions than necessarily protagonist and secondary characters or environment or world. That isn't to say that those don't have a significant role. There's just certain interactions that can only convey a certain affect because of a companion, which is kind of distinct from the pod, which is that sort of Navi-esque little robot friend that hovers over you and helps you in combat. The pod is actually your projectile weapon that you can activate rather than the swords you fight with. But outside of those combat sequences, the pod is this artificial intelligence, very rudimentary, trying to understand why 2B and 9S as androids are having these very human emotions that they don't necessarily understand themselves, but can kind of grasp where it's coming from. The pod cannot at all. The recommendation from the pod is always to follow protocol, follow programming. We are detecting certain abnormalities in the flow of things because there's something like empathy coming out towards a machine that is supposed to be destroyed by you. So from the external kind of intentional breaking of communication between you and your companion, what sort of a message can you convey to the player? So for me, the companion always serves more of a empathic, affective response than necessarily one on gameplay directly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, I feel like companions have that way for like a developer, a creator, to kind of mount arguments or play with arguments that are being, like, I guess, highlight different arguments they're making in the play world, especially in Nier Automata. There's like a lot going on with like what is human, what is robot, robots learning and adopting kind of like human relationships. So having that extra kind of dialogue between two people, especially as you can kind of traverse through worlds, is really good thematically or helpful thematically.
Definitely, yeah. I can only imagine the role of a developer trying to have a lot of the very philosophical arguments and discussions that Nier takes on with just a protagonist. How much internal talking do you have to have going on?
Deadpool could probably do it.
What was that about Death Stranding you were talking about earlier? I'm sure Kojima could take it on too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he does in Death Stranding. There's a lot going on.
We'll save that for another podcast, I'm sure. Add us on Twitter if you want us to do a podcast exclusively on Death Stranding. Please don't actually.
Please.
But I feel like we all want to hear about Boy. Especially in terms of combat and external outside of combat. I feel like the Boy has a lot to say.
So, not to talk any smack about all of your companions, because I haven't played Nier Automata, but I have played BioShock and I haven't played Legend of Zelda, but Atreus, the son of Kratos, is more interesting in my opinion, but so just to give the sit rep on Kratos and his beautiful abs. There have been like 5 God of War games, but this one is called God of War because I think they kind of wanted to refresh the series. Kratos' typical plot lines go along the lines of go to this place, kill this guy, go to this place, kill this god for not letting you kill this god, keep killing the gods, and then when all the gods are dead, kill yourself. And that was how the series kind of ended in God of War 3. But then they did a prequel for God of War Ascension, and all of it kind of just wraps up into this very plain, angry dude running places and hitting things, which for an early 2000s PlayStation game did very well for itself with in terms of graphics and gameplay and Greek nerds just loving the hell out of a new take on Greekness, but then Percy Jackson ruined it. Anyway, the main point is they kind of wanted to give something new to this series, and they still wanted Kratos to be the center of attention. However, the issue with that is that he is very plain. So how do you do that with someone that is just anger and brooding toxic masculinity? And their solution is make him a husband. And they did that. And you can see how much of a difference, even right at the beginning of the game, how different he is from the original Kratos that we know and love, that is swinging his Blaze of Chaos into Zeus's face. But then they were like, no, we should take it a step farther. Make him a father. So that's the companion you have to work with. You are this jacked old god of war that has slowly become used to living a life of peace with his wife in the woods. But then he loses his wife, and he is told by her will, I guess she told it to him beforehand, to climb the highest mountain in the 9 realms and spread her ashes with boy, Atreus. He is a very kind of distant son at the time of the beginning of the game, at least. And it's very obvious that they didn't have much interaction. They both kind of more or less bonded with the mother, and now that she's out of the way, all they have left is each other. And the main kind of like setup we have for it is it's still like a journey that they have to go on, in which definitely they're going to be killing giant monsters and gods. No, don't even question that from a God of War series. But it's more so from the character interactions that these two people have. And there's just this kind of development that Kratos cannot have as a person on his own. There are things that he cannot do differently, and the people that are in his life that actually mean stuff to him kind of prompt that change, and you get to see this more delicate person who actually wants to help this child survive. And you can see the frustration on his face through the entire game as the kid makes mistakes, and he gets berated a lot. And it's kind of this story that couldn't happen if there was only one person in it. And like with Nier Automata, where the two androids together kind of discover emotions, the boy is just kind of learning, and it's kind of like a coming of age story for him. And Kratos is trying to figure out how to be a good father, because as he knows, fathers kind of suck, because Zeus was his father and he killed him. And also they tried to, it's a long story, a lot of drama, a lot of lore, not really a lot of lore, it's Greek mythology, but there's a lot. So yeah, the main thing that they that we get out of that is a more developed main character, as opposed to something that is so bland that anyone can imprint on. By the end of it, I started kind of feeling like a father in some way, and that's still a degree of mainstream masculine storytelling that you see in The Last of Us as well. But at the same time, it's the fostering of the emotion that wouldn't be possible without the companion there.
I can really associate with that, like, parental figure. I know I talked about it on episode 36, 35 in Detroit Become Human with Kara and Alice. But to say nothing of the women in refrigerator tropes, that is the call to action of God of War, it's interesting, assuming my memory holds correctly, that just as much as you are becoming a better father and growing to see the value in Atreus as your son, from a mechanic standpoint, because there is a skill tree, right? Where you have to decide whether to spend things on yourself or on Atreus.
Yeah, definitely. The thing that kind of like puts him above Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite, in my opinion, is that he becomes useful in combat. And there are some places and things that you just can't pass without his active involvement in, which kind of makes it feel a lot better, because Kratos hasn't really ever fought alongside of somebody in the previous games. So this was definitely an appealing contrast to see him kind of work together with his son and kick ass.
Can you do like cool combos with your son?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Nice.
Can I just say I'm a little sad that you were talking about Atreus, who, leading into your section here, fondly refer to as boy, as Kratos does. But I'm a little sad that you decided to go with Atreus rather than Mimir. Just that wonderful talking head, literally, seems like the kind of penultimate idea of a expositional companion.
Yes, expositional companion, but there wasn't as much chemistry there with Mimir. The main chemistry that Mimir had, the only reason that Kratos didn't like smack him every time he opened his mouth was because there was like the lightheartedness that Atreus brought to that scene. And in all honesty, Mimir wouldn't have been that interesting as a character if he didn't have like somebody that could like work with him in an actual functional conversation. Otherwise, it would just be exposition dumps that he'd be giving Kratos without actually having any kind of interest or meaning behind it. Because a lot of the stuff that he does talk about while you're in a boat or while you're walking is like legends and stories about Norse mythology that have kind of been like changed slightly from like a first person point of view that Atreus takes a lot of like joy in, but Kratos probably wouldn't care for.
It seems like more so than BioShock Infinite and the Legend of Zelda series, God of War, and Nier Automata, really like their companions do so much more to flesh out the main characters, which I think is interesting.
And that kind of leads us into our next question. Thank you for that add-on. But it's what makes a companion interesting, and how do they differ from like a cinematic companion? Like you have companions in Shrek, the greatest movie of all time, like Donkey or Puss in Boots. Yeah, essentially. But like, how would a cinematic companion like that not be able to be used in the same way as a video game companion?
Well, so I think it depends on how compelling that companion is. So like because you have some games where it's literally just like if you think about Fable, not that we're talking about Fable, but as a quick side note, like it's your companion is your dog, and as much as like I grew an attachment for it, it's not necessarily like the dog just helps you during battle, other than unless you're talking about one particular scene in one of the games, but other than that, not really. But I think when you have a more like fleshed out companion character, like I'm gonna keep going back to Midna, 'cause she's my favorite. You sort of you kind of get this like pseudo what's that like pseudo social interaction thing that like cinematic companions. Yeah, exactly. Like it's a social interaction without it being a full social interaction. So where you have a companion and a main character in a movie that you passively are like, aha, yes, I identify with this like companion that you're playing with, you're actually almost having a social interaction that you don't get to have when you're watching a movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the idea that you're actually kind of interacting with them through, how you're playing the game really makes you feel more attached. And I'm trying to think of like a cinematic companion that's not like a donkey type, that's just like, says funny things and maybe like, questions the hero or is like a lore dumper or stuff like that. Like, can you guys think of any cinematic companion that's not just like a goofball guy who's like, oh, this is what the world's like, or like, oh, what are you doing?
I think it's really interesting to compare television to movies in that way. Because I think a lot of the struggles that we have in that comparison are very movie based, where we only have an hour and a half, or Lord of the Rings 5.5 hours, to grow and bond with those characters and see that sort of dynamic form where Donkey or Pippin are just making these jokes that have some narrative or substantial value, but is largely just sort of lighthearted and ongoing. Whereas something like a TV show, I've been watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the first time. Curse me, I swear. Where you really come to watch the companion characters develop and change in a way that I think is far more similar to a game companion, where as much as you don't have the personal interaction, especially in games where the choices you make affect how the companions develop. Something like Dragon Age. I wish Sarah was here to talk about Dragon Age. But how your choices affect them versus how they change and grow over a longer period of time of several seasons of a show rather than a single movie is something interesting to consider too.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the only other movie companion I can think of, and this took me a while to think of this, but in School of Rock, the main character is the goofball, and his best friend is the logical, reasonable, rational one. But can you even consider that Jack Black's character's companion, considering he's only there in certain points of the movie, and the kids fill in that quote-unquote companion role as well? So it's like it alternates between them. But that's the only instance I can think of off the top of my head, as weird as that sounds, because they usually are. The fool is, like to go back to tropes or Shakespeare tropes, the fool is usually the companion.
I think it's that degree of perspective that we have with video games to begin with, where it's just if you're doing it from a first person point of view or even from a third person point of view, usually the person that you're looking at is the companion. So they have to be entertaining, they have to be cool, there has to be something about them that makes them interesting for you to want to play a game in which you're kind of just looking at them over your own gun half the time. And I think that because of the way that movies and television work cinematically, there can be multiple focuses and multiple perspectives that you can look from that kind of just you want to kind of flesh out everyone that you can. But with the video game, it's more let's just put all of our charm and wit into this one person and then focus on the mechanics. And I don't want to say that all video games are like that, but there are a lot that kind of just have bland, straight male, white male protagonists that kind of just objectively every other character is more interesting than them in the game.
Yeah, I think Nier does a decent job of avoiding that. Obviously, it's not perfect, but you play a set of characters who start out as companions or opposition, and as the story progresses, you take on their role and get new companions and new people who interact. And the game made me cry more than once, but it also made me cry over these two very human side characters who you can interact with as often as you want. They start off as merchants, but it progresses to the point where you start to interact and understand them in a way that you really wouldn't be able to, I don't think, in a movie in the same way, because there's that sort of almost like a meta commentary that I think some games, and I think Nier does it fairly well, where very seldom, and I don't want to talk about Deadpool, very seldom does a movie specifically make a point of saying, hey, remember, you're watching a movie, pay attention to these details, they're important. Where I think a lot of game companions really do that, especially when it comes to people like Navi or Midna, especially as you're working through puzzles and stuff, who explicitly tell you, here is how you do this. There's that sort of guiding hand of the companion that the companions in movies, I can't imagine for the life of me Donkey telling the viewer, hey, Shrek going to save the princess is actually going to be the lead into them getting married, kind of thing, where Navi very possibly could say, hey, Link, shooting the arrow at that target will make it so that you can climb up these vines. Sabrina, please feel free to correct me. I have not played with Navi.
That's absolutely so I should clarify. Navi did not. So she did a lot in terms of being explicit and more tutorial based than maybe Midna did, but not everything was super explicit at the same time, but it was still it was a lot more clear. So she didn't necessarily help you with puzzles. She just told you hey, maybe we should figure this out, this specific thing out before we move on. Whereas Midna was just constantly she still did that as well, but it was a little more it was better written in terms of the narrative elements, because it was yeah, we need to figure this out so that we can move on, but it just seemed to be more seamless and work a little bit better. And then you had Fee in Skyward Sword, who is basically like a humanoid supercomputer, and would literally tell you that is not correct, or you only have a 97% chance of doing well on this, or something like that. So it like they embodied it differently, but you're absolutely right. It was a little more like handheld, for lack of a better term.
So what you're saying is, if you really want a companion to ride you, you need to go to Midna.
Pretty much. Like, that's why I love Midna so much. Because she's just like, what are you staring at me for? Go do this thing, please. Get off my back. We need to hurry up.
Come on, I was going for the pun of the fact that Midna literally rides you in wolf form.
Oh, yeah! I missed that entirely.
I did think of a really good companion, though, who's in movies and TV. Is Dr. Watson from Sherlock. Especially in the, like, Benedict Cumberbatch ones. Like, Dr. Watson is awesome. And he has more than, like, quips. He does have some quips, but he's actually, like, kind of a more interesting character than Sherlock.
They definitely work as a foil for each other in terms of, like, him bringing the humanity back to a cold, logical beast.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and sorry, Watson is also a she in the Elementary show.
Wait, I loved, by the way. I know it's not everybody's favorite, but I love it.
No, you're right to love it. It's good. What I saw of it was really good.
I haven't even thought about that show since high school. Oh my goodness.
I think I just like the fact that Sherlock was seemingly a lot more flawed in that show than in other depictions of Sherlock that I've seen. And Watson seemed... Well, I kind of like the fact that Watson was a woman in that, but also she just seemed to have her shit together, and it wasn't just like following Sherlock or being the voice of reason when Sherlock's sort of operating like a supercomputer. She actually was the one that like seems to know her shit in a way that Sherlock doesn't, if that makes sense.
She was like Sherlock's babysitter, essentially. Yeah. She was like his like social worker counselor or something in that.
Yeah, exactly. She was the literal doctor, and that's what I loved about it.
Mm-hmm. But enough about Elementary.
I'm looking for a really good segue to our next question from that, but I'm having such a hard time.
I mean, a companion in a video game, a companion has the ability, unlike in a movie, to be like, hey, press B or press X to do this. And that's the kind of liberty companions can do in video games, other than, you can't, as Lia was saying, you can't say, look at that blue rose that, is happening in this scene.
Patrick, it's funny you should mention liberty, because the next question is what kind of liberties do we see taken with regard to the companions that would not be possible in other media or otherwise? What do we see in terms of like exploring themes? What do we see in terms of like experimentation that are just held within the span of a video game companion's ken?
All right, so this is where I go off on a tangent about amiibos.
Ready?
Okay, so Breath of the Wild doesn't have a companion. It's like the first Zelda game since Zelda 2 that doesn't have a companion, at least that I can think of, or like the big main ones. But you can buy... Does anybody know what an amiibo is, first of all?
I do, but maybe just explain it.
Okay. So it looks like a little like toy or figurine or whatever, but you could like use them. They were like collectible characters that you could insert into various games. So for Breath of the Wild, when it first came out, they made a Wolf Link amiibo, and Wolf Link, that like you got to insert Wolf Link as a companion into Breath of the Wild. And
oh, what?
Yeah. Oh man, it was awesome. So it operated like the Wolf Link amiibo operated much like the dog in the Fable series operates. So it's literally just like your attack buddy. But so the liberty, I guess, here is that you can think of creative ways to insert the companion. So in this case, you have like a physical object that you can use to put a digital character into a game. So the implementation and the introduction of the companion can be literally whatever you want, as long as it's technologically technically capable. I can speak.
That also makes me, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Skylanders, but that was something similar where it's like physical toys that you put on this stand to use in a game. But we probably shouldn't talk too much about it because it's I don't know if it has to do with companions.
Skylanders was the original amiibo. Essentially, they took the Skylanders design and went, "What if we did this, but with all of Nintendo?" And they won.
I didn't know that. That's actually, I gotta look that up later.
There's also Starlink now too, which looks cool, but it's something I'm never gonna get into.
I'm really thinking on what kind of liberties. Like, so much of it seems to be the idea that the companion at any given time knows what you need. The sort of expectation of, it's like, oh, you haven't left this room yet, and as developers, we think you should have left this room. The companion will tell you, it's like, hey, like, we really need to get going, or, hey, you forgot to grab the weapon back there, you're probably going to need it. It's dangerous to go it alone, take this. From its very fundamental level, it seems to be that sort of, from a programming point, conscious understanding that what a player needs at any given time is going to change. And that really kind of, in my mind anyways, boils down to UIs, and pulling back to what Patrick said earlier, the sort of press F to pay respects, which we're not sponsored by Polygon. Polygon, if you want to interact with us, please, we are more than happy to collab on something. But Polygon did a really, really excellent video on UI and the way it affects player interaction and immersion and everything. But I think in terms of companions, the companion is almost sort of a mitigating factor about that remove from immersion, rather than a great big blatant press F to pay respects. Hey, like, do you want to pay your respects before we leave? The way that a companion can say those things to convey an action to the player that a movie or a TV show or a post on social media may not be able to do in the same way. It doesn't have that same call to action.
Yeah, we cognitively give a lot of allowances, like in breaking the fourth wall and like kind of breaking immersion for companions, which is really cool. It's like we don't even think about it when they're like, do this, which essentially they're just saying to go press button. But, it's an interesting way to do it beyond just having a prompt. But there's no real comparison for movies. Other than, as you're saying, Leah, like, you can't have someone say, pay attention to this. The movie has to kind of show you in a different way.
It just makes me think of the beggar from Ocarina of Time, where it's like, please, with C, sell me something. But yeah, no, movies, like, other than Deadpool, or maybe others that break the fourth wall that I can't think of right now, they usually rely on, like, camera angles. So if we think of Shrek the Third, because I watched that recently, like, when he first drinks the potion, that's supposed to make him quote unquote beautiful, and then
that is the second Shrek
movie,
that's the not second. The third Shrek movie.
My mistake. Thank you for that. We have a Shrek expert here.
It's a good thing you watched the movie recently, or you would have totally made a mistake.
To be fair, I watched them all in succession, so maybe that's part of it.
Oh, nice.
But when he sneezes like on the mushroom, and then they walk away, but then the camera stays on the mushroom, and then the mushroom turns into the rose. So, like, that's how they sort of get around that, like, hey, pay attention to this, something important is happening. But with a companion, you can just do that. Like, you don't have to use fancy camera tricks or like, hint at it subtly. You can literally just be like, sell me something with C.
But that kind of stuff, like foreshadowing, definitely does go better. It goes well with movies, and it's better utilized with movies than a lot of older games. I don't know how focused the original Legends of Zeldas were narratively wise, but I think, like, if you wanted to get any kind of sense of story, you had to read the case it came in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely for 1 and 2, absolutely. I think Ocarina of Time did a little bit better at making the story more obvious during gameplay.
The whatever it's called, Legend of Link Zelda 2. I feel like at the beginning you start and there's like the sleeping or dead or whatever Zelda, so that's kind of your story. But I remember playing it as a kid and just not really knowing what's happening other than like when I die, a pig guy laughs at me and I have to go towards a castle.
Yeah, like it definitely just sort of gestures at the sense of a narrative, but I found like when you like chronologically look at games and you move through like old school roguelikes that don't even really have a story unless you somehow figured it out or read the manual or whatever, to now there's a lot more influence from cinema coming in terms of how they convey the story, but at the same time there's a lot more liberties that like, okay, we're just going to insert this companion, for instance, to bring it back to the companion topic, and the companion is going to break the fourth wall every once in a while but also hint at the lore, or you're going to find this piece of paper on the ground that's going to somehow tell you about the lore or whatever. So yeah, the more games have developed, the more that sort of narrative element has come in and has come in in a strong way, if that makes sense.
Can we call companions in games a kind of narrative crutch? Because there's a lot of games where you can just have the companions. I mean, going back to BioShock, or going back to Mimir or something, and I've never played God of War beyond maybe like the first or second one for a second. That you can just say so much lore and so much, you can express so much narrative in a companion that you don't have to, necessarily have your main character encounter or be told. So they really, if we're talking about liberties for the director or writer, they can just have this companion tell you everything instead of needing to find it or get in the way of, shooting fools in the face.
I agree with you and I disagree with you, but only from God of War perspective. I agree with you because when I look past Kratos and Atreus, there's like one other good character. All the rest are very bland and they haven't been as well developed narratively or just personality wise as the main two, because they were in the story for a longer time and they're going to be more of a focal point. I disagree with you in terms of it being a narrative crutch. I think that it definitely complements the story, but one of the main things that I wanted to touch on is that with Atreus, the creator, the designer for this God of War game, Atreus is sort of used to explore a theme of the problematic masculine side other God of War games kind of resembled. Jason Cash wrote a piece titled "We Must Be Better" for FPS, which really hits home to what the franchise was going for. And the point of this game was to find a way to redeem Kratos for his problematic notions of masculinity. And unlike BioShock Infinite, Kratos cannot punch and kill his way through redemption, and the only way that he really is able to save his son at the end is to kind of give him his own agency over the struggle that he's been going through throughout the game. Kratos is kind of like, in his son, he's kind of forced to see his own ideology as he makes it backfire against him, as he sees his son kill a deer, and then when he gets freaked out / angered when Atreus stabs a son of Thor in the neck later on in the game without giving two thoughts to the fact that he was taking a person's life. And he comes to the realization that by controlling him, he is kind of leading him down the same path that he went down initially. And that's kind of just like holding a mirror up to the rest of the God of War series. And Atreus is kind of that sort of hope that people typically have for the next generation, and though they're going to be better than the current one. And I don't see it as a narrative crutch if the entire focus and building point is thematically explored through the two main characters that are in the actual game.
Anyone know any good literary companions?
Literature is admittedly not my strongest suit.
Yeah, books are for nerds. We can admit that here.
Jaskier from the Witcher series, and I specifically mean because I know I might get heat if I talk about the TV show, but I'm focusing on the books.
Oh, who cares? The TV show's awesome.
I know one of my friends does not like the TV show for decent reasons, but yeah, no. So like I could think of the Witcher book series, like Jaskier would be a good example, as well as the horse Roach. But I don't remember the English translation name or if that's the actual name.
Yeah, Roach is, as far as I remember, the English translation, as far as the games, or at least The Witcher 3 is concerned. But even that's a really interesting comparison, the book to the game. But I'm curious what Patrick's about to say.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I was thinking from the show, Jaskier is such an interesting companion because he really becomes a foil, but really like fleshes out instead of just being a goofball. Although he is kind of a goofball, he really, I guess, kind of like Atreus, kind of fleshes out Geralt. But then in the games, Dandelion, as he's called in the games, is just kind of annoying. He's like a voiceover that just is not fun.
Yeah, he's also called Dandelion in the English translation of the books, but I do remember that Jaskier would be the original name in the Polish books. But either way, yeah, like there is a very because in the books, admittedly, I have not read most of the books, but this is mostly for my partner who is obsessed with the books. In the books, he's a little more closer to like your description of the show, compared to where he seems to like flesh out Geralt's character a little bit more and the narrative a bit more. Whereas that's very different from what he's like in the game.
It's interesting thinking of that sort of cross-media wise, kind of calling back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, where the developers or the writers, the publishers, the producer, take your pick of your media people, the way that, especially going from one media to another, or from one iteration of the game like God of War to the new one, that you can really use the companions as sort of that call to improve and recognize, like Joey was saying, the ways that it allows you to critique yourself or potentially the other media forms where, not necessarily intentionally, but certainly kind of subtextually, the show is, for The Witcher show is really kind of demonstrating comparison of how much of a non-character Jaskier or Dandelion is playing in The Witcher 3. Where in The Witcher 4, potentially, Dandelion might be this super fantastic expositional character, or maybe not. But we don't know that. Where we do know with something like God of War, it very much is calling back the potential flaws of previous games as the developers, like we as academics, kind of grow and learn and understand the shortcomings of certain game styles or exposition styles or values that are held, thinking the very dramatic number of issues that I can think of with Nier Automata, where it has all sorts of great aspects to it, but there are shortcomings, and thinking how future iterations might, not necessarily explicitly, but implicitly in the ways that they make you interact with characters, and those characters with companions, kind of call attention to those flaws from previous games, I think is an interesting liberty that companions have in games, but across all media, in a way.
So overall, when we look at companions, if they're handled well, they overall seem to be a positive thing when they're utilized, or I don't know, positive might be a weird word, an enjoyable addition to the gameplay experience. I can't really think of any companions except for maybe Navi that get really annoying.
Yeah, I mean, as much as Navi gets really annoying, at the same time, I have a special love for Navi because I grew up with it. But yeah, like very rarely, at least in my experience, have I actually been irritated by a companion, I think.
Yeah. Do we want to call it there and wind down? I'm just looking at the time, and we're very quickly approaching the hour and a few minutes mark.
Yes, that sounds good.
Thanks for listening to us talk about our gaming experiences and what these experiences mean on a broader scale. What do you think about what we had to say? Let us know who your favorite companion is. You can find us at FPS Weekly or start a conversation using the hashtag #FirstPersonPodcast on Twitter.
Again, I'm Sabrina Sgandurra. You can find me on Twitter at Sabrina SG, or you can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/BrainiacBree.
I'm Lia Black. You can find me on Twitter at lillian.a.black, which I don't check as often as I maybe could, so don't count on me to see everything if you interact with me there, but I will do better. You can always send me your commentaries at commentaries@firstpersonscholar.com. And should everything go according to plan, on Twitch at twitch.tv/Valkyrie de la Lune.
And I'm Patrick Dolan. Like Leah, if you have an essay, send me your essays at essays@firstpersonscholar.com. And also you can find me at Twitch, twitch.tv/Dr. Sandmonster. And that's Doctor with just DR.
First Person Podcast is produced by Giuseppe Femia with support from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and the Games Institute at the University of Waterloo.